The first sound I remember is not my own voice. It was the ticking of the clock above my mother's pantry door, steady and plain, while 23 pairs of hands moved through the fellowship meal like they had been trained by one body instead of many. The men were outside near the buggies, talking about the weather and the fields. Inside, the women carried bowls of noodles, roast chicken, brown butter, and creamed celery from one narrow table to another. I was 22 years old, and my youngest son was asleep upstairs in a borrowed crib with a quilt tucked too tightly under his chin. I remember the kitchen window steamed white from dishwater. I remember my apron strings cutting into my waist. I remember one sentence rising in me so quietly I almost mistook it for a thought that would pass on its own. But it did not pass. It came out of my mouth in the church service an hour later, in a room full of wooden benches and lowered heads and old men who had spent their whole lives believing silence was the purest form of obedience. I asked, who asked her what she wanted? No one answered me then. That was not our way. But by the time the week was over, I understood what happens to Amish women who speak one sentence too clearly in a room built on yielding. I learned it the way Amish women always learn things, quietly, sideways. My name is Martha, and this is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where I tell the truth about the world I grew up in and the things many people only understand after they leave it. I was raised old order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I married at 19 and I left at 26. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from or whether you were ever raised in a place where your questions cost more than your silence. I read every single one. In the outside world, a question is often only a question. In my community, a question could be a kind of weather. It could change the temperature of a house. It could move through a family faster than snow over a field. It could settle into your marriage bed. It could follow you into the barn before dawn and stand beside you while you milked cows with your hands still shaking from the day before. The Ordnung was never written down for us in the way English people think of rules being written down. It lived in the air. It lived in habit, in tone, in what older women corrected without explanation, in which hems were too bright, in how long a pause after a bishop spoke was considered respectful, in when a wife lowered her eyes and when she did not. Everyone knew, no one said. We were taught that order itself was holy, God above all, then the bishop, then the husband, then the wife, then the children. By the time I was old enough to understand the shape of that ladder, I had already learned my rung by heart. The word we heard again and again was Gelassenheit, yielding, letting go of the self, surrendering pride. There was another word too, Hochmut, pride. It was spoken over women more than men, at least in the rooms where I sat. Pride was not only vanity. Pride was a woman liking her own opinion too much. Pride was a woman trusting the warning inside her own body. Pride was a woman speaking at the wrong time in a room arranged by men. A wife submits, a husband leads. It was said so often it stopped sounding like a sentence and became architecture. Silence was load-bearing. Silence was the wall holding up the roof. If you pulled at it, even a little, everyone behaved as if you were endangering the whole house. I did not marry a cruel man. I want to say that early because truth matters, and because simple villains make easy stories and false ones. My husband's name was Jonas. He was broad-shouldered, careful with horses, patient with children, and the kind of man who fixed harness leather by lamplight after supper without being asked. I met him at a singing in late autumn when I was 17, though back then girls were not supposed to look as long as they felt like looking. He stood near the doorway with 3 other young men, his hat in his hands, his hair flattened from the cold. He did not smile much. That was part of what made me trust him. People say Amish courtship is simple. What they mean is that it is narrow. Narrow things can still hold a great deal of pressure. By the time I was 19, we were married on a Thursday in November. There were close to 300 people, maybe more. 4 hours of preaching. Wooden benches brought in from neighboring homes. Roast chicken, stuffing, noodles, celery and cream sauce, pickled red beets, coffee, and 7 kinds of pie lined across tables so long, the room looked like it had no end. I wore a plain blue dress and an apron, so stiff at the waist I felt like I'd been wrapped into someone else's life before I'd fully stood up inside my own. Jonas was not a monster. He was a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside. That matters. It does not erase harm, but it matters. Our first son came 11 months later. Our daughter came 2 winters after that, then another son. My body, by 22, already felt like a body that had been working a long time. There are kinds of tiredness women learn to hide because the world around them has no use for seeing them clearly. That was the sort of tired I had become. Not dramatic, not visible, just constant. My bones ached when I bent to lift a wash bucket. My milk let down while I kneaded bread. Some evenings, the only thought I had left by supper was how good a bare plank floor looked when you wanted to lie down on anything at all. The Sunday I spoke was in March. A young woman from our district had just been married 2 months before. She was 17, soft-faced, quick-handed, the sort of girl who blushed when older women teased her about married life. Her mother had died when she was 12, and after that she had become the kind of daughter communities admire because she learned not to burden anyone with the visible shape of her needs. That morning, before church, I saw her near the stove in the host house. Her face was pale under her prayer covering. She held a platter of bread with both hands as if its weight were the only thing keeping her upright. "Are you unwell?" I asked her quietly. She gave the smile women give when the truthful answer would be inconvenient to too many people. "I am only tired." Only tired. There are sentences I still hear in my sleep. During the service, the bishop spoke about obedience. He spoke of households that drift when wives grow independent in spirit. He spoke of softness, of harmony, of the danger of bringing the outside world's selfishness into a God-ordered home. Then, without saying her name, he spoke of young brides learning their duties with cheerful hearts. I knew who he meant. I felt it in my stomach before I felt it in my mind. The room had that stillness old church rooms get when everyone understands more than the speaker has said aloud. I looked at the floorboards. I looked at the black shoes of the men on the bench ahead of us. I looked at my own hands, red from lye soap and work and winter, and before caution could climb up and close my throat, I heard myself say it. "Who asked her what she wanted?" Not loudly. That is what people who have never lived in such rooms do not understand. You do not need to shout to break the spell. Sometimes a plain sentence in the wrong place is louder than rage. The bishop stopped. No one turned fully to look at me because direct looking would have admitted something had happened. But I felt every body in that room become aware of mine. The silence after my question did not feel empty. It felt crowded, like there were too many things in it for anyone to move. Then the bishop cleared his throat and resumed speaking as if I had coughed. That was all. That was enough. Jonas did not speak to me on the ride home. The horse's hooves made a soft, regular sound on the lane. My daughter leaned against me, half asleep. The baby on my lap smelled faintly of milk and wool. Jonas held the reins with both hands and looked straight ahead. I waited for him to be angry. I waited for him to argue. I waited for anything at all. Nothing. That evening, he ate the roast beef I set before him, thanked the children when they passed bread, fed the horse before dark, and went to bed without turning toward me. Not that day, not the next, not the day after that. There are women who would rather be shouted at than set down inside. A silence so complete it makes them question whether they still exist in the room. That week, I became one of them. On Tuesday, my mother came by with canned pears and 2 loaves of bread. Her hands kept moving the whole time she talked, the way Amish women's hands keep moving when they are delivering something too hard to look at directly. She folded dish towels. She straightened a stack of plates that did not need straightening. She checked the stove twice. Finally, she said, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes." She said it as if she were discussing weather, as if frost had entered by natural law and not by design. I asked, "Did I say something untrue?" Her face changed only a little, but I saw it. That is not the same as saying something useful. Then she reached for the pears and asked whether I had enough sugar left for canning season. This is how warnings come, not straight. Never straight. The truth is handed to you inside ordinary chores, wrapped in coffee steam and dishwater, So later, no one can say anything specific was done to you. On Thursday, Jonas's sister Anna stopped by with her mending basket. We sat at the kitchen table while the children played on the floor with clothespins and a cracked wooden horse missing one wheel. Anna threaded a needle without looking at me. You know how men are embarrassed when women speak on certain matters, she said. Why should they be? I asked, if what they are doing is right. She smiled then, but not with warmth. It was the smile of someone who hears a person stepping toward a drop off and does not know whether to reach for her or let her learn by falling. It is not good for you to sound English, she said. English. That word can do a great deal of work in an Amish room. It can mean worldly, proud, restless, unsubmitted, dangerous. It can mean a woman has begun to imagine that her mind belongs to her. By Saturday, Jonas had still not touched me except to pass a kettle from stove to table. Our children felt the change even if they had no language for it. Our daughter grew clingy. The baby cried more at dusk. The oldest boy asked why Dad was not laughing. I told him his father was tired. Only tired. That phrase again. The next week, the bishop's wife came unannounced in the afternoon, while snow melt dripped from the eaves and the barn smelled of damp hay. Her name was Miriam. She was known for being gentle, which in our world often meant she could carry sharp things without ever seeming to. She sat in my kitchen with her gloves folded neatly in her lap and said, sometimes the Lord tests us through the feeling of being misunderstood. Does the Lord also test men through the feeling of being questioned? I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine then. Not angry, worse than angry, concerned. My dear, she said softly, there is a spirit that can come over a woman when she begins to think her own discernment is safer than the covering God has given her. The covering God has given her. She meant husband, bishop, order, structure, submission disguised as shelter. I said nothing after that, and she patted my hand as though silence had proved her point. The truth came to me 3 days later at a quilting bee in Rebecca Miller's kitchen. Rebecca was older than me by maybe 15 years, though hard work can make years difficult to count in Amish women. She had the sort of face that seemed plain until you looked long enough to see the intelligence in it. She snapped beans into a yellow bowl while the rest of us stitched and spoke in those half sentences women use when men are nearby in another room. At some point, the others drifted outside to shake crumbs from tablecloths and look at a new foal in the yard. Rebecca stayed behind. I stayed behind too, pretending I had dropped a needle. She kept snapping beans. Not looking at me, she said, they do not need to strike you to make your body obey. My hands stopped moving. The room seemed to grow quieter, even though the children were still laughing somewhere beyond the screen door. Rebecca dropped another bean into the bowl. The cold is part of it, she said. The unspoken part. The part that teaches faster than words. I could not answer. She added, still not looking at me, you are not the first woman to ask a true question, Martha. You are only the first one this month. Then she stood, lifted the bowl, and carried it to the stove, as if she had merely commented on supper. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not dramatically, not with thunder, not with courage the size of a sermon. Just a small movement, like a latch loosening in a room no one expected you to leave. Before I keep going, if this story is resonating with you, subscribe, like this video, and stay with me. These stories are not easy to tell, and if you have stayed with me this long, thank you. After the quilting bee, I began seeing the structure everywhere. I saw it when Jonas softened toward the children, but not toward me, making me feel both punished and foolish for noticing. I saw it when my mother praised me in public for being such a steady worker, and then avoided being alone with me long enough for truth to become possible. I saw it when older women spoke about marriage, as if it were a weather system women were expected to survive without naming. In the outside world, people talk about control as something obvious: a slammed fist, a bruise, a door locked from the outside. In my community, control often arrived in cleaner clothes. It came as concern. It came as prayer. It came as disappointment. It came as the long withdrawal of warmth until your body learned that safety lived on the far side of obedience. Jonas eventually spoke to me again, but only in practical sentences. Move the buggy blanket inside. The mare is favoring her left foot. The bishop may stop by Thursday. I answered in the same plain way. I did not apologize. Perhaps that was my second offense. When the bishop did come, he arrived in late afternoon with his hat damp from sleet and his beard shining at the ends. He sat in our warm front room. My mother-in-law had sent a pie. Someone always sent pie for these visits. As though sugar could disguise the purpose of a meeting, Jonas sat beside the stove. I sat across from the bishop with my hands folded so tightly in my lap, my fingernails left half moons in my palms. The bishop spoke gently. That is important to say. He never raised his voice. We do not want to lose you, he said. Lose me. As if I were the one walking toward distance. As if the floor beneath me were not already being removed board by board. He said I had embarrassed the district. He said I had introduced confusion into a matter that required trust. He said a wife's public questioning could weaken her husband's standing and disturb the peace of the church. He asked whether pride had entered my heart. There it was. Hochmut. I said, I only asked who had asked the girl what she wanted. He nodded in the patient way men nod when they are translating a woman's words into a smaller meaning. And what she wants, he said, must be understood inside what God asks of her. There are sentences that tell you the entire shape of a system in a single breath. That was one of them. I remember the kettle beginning to sing on the stove. I remember Jonas not looking at me. I remember my own heartbeat, not fast exactly, but deep, like something knocking from inside a wall. The bishop leaned forward a little. Martha, he said, a great deal of unhappiness comes from measuring holy things by personal comfort. Personal comfort, that is what he called it. Exhaustion, fear. A young bride barely standing upright. The right to be consulted about the life happening inside her own body. Personal comfort. I thought then of my children asleep in their little room under quilts pieced by women who had probably swallowed whole countries of grief. I thought of my mother's proverb. I thought of Rebecca snapping beans into a bowl. I thought of how many truths had to be renamed before this world could keep calling itself peaceful. Still, I did not argue. Not because he was right, because I had begun to understand that their strongest weapon was not volume. It was the ability to make any woman who resisted sound unreasonable simply by staying calm while they erased her. The bishop left with prayer. The cold stayed. Spring came. Mud season. Then planting. Life, especially farm life, has a way of continuing as if revelation were no excuse for falling behind. I baked bread, scrubbed collars, changed nappies, weeded onions, rendered lard, and braided my daughter's hair so tightly she winced. But something in me had stopped consenting to the story I'd been handed. The decision did not arrive in one bright instant. It arrived the way you know a season has changed before the calendar agrees, quietly, by accumulation. One morning in June, I was hanging shirts on the line behind the house. Jonas's shirts, my boys' little shirts, my own dresses, heavy with well water and soap. A neighbor's buggy passed on the lane. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted its weight. The air smelled of clover and manure and sunlight on wet fabric. I looked at the row of men's shirts turning in the breeze and thought, with no drama at all, if my daughter grows here, she will learn to apologize for hearing herself think. That was it. No thunder, no speech, no broken plate. Just one plain sentence in my own mind, steady as a post, driven into the ground. I began, after that, to notice money differently. The egg money, the little sewing money, the spare change left from market. I wrapped coins in a scrap of cloth and tucked them inside an old jar behind feed sacks in the barn. I did not tell Rebecca. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell myself I was leaving. I only told myself I was making room for possibility. Sometimes that is the first form freedom takes. Not escape, permission. I will not tell the story of the day I left in full here because that belongs to a different telling, and some parts of it still belong to people whose names I keep carefully. I will only say this. There was one bag. There was a phone shanty. There was a Mennonite woman in town who looked at me once and did not ask for proof before offering help. There was hidden money, not much. There was more fear than I knew a body could carry while still walking. After I left, the silence changed shape but did not disappear. Letters came back unopened. Phone calls rang and rang into that empty mechanical sound that means no one will pick up. Not because no one is home, but because they are. Once, months later, I saw my mother in town near the fabric store. She looked at me, and for 1 second I saw every version of her at once. The young girl she had been, the obedient wife, the tired mother, the woman who loved me, the woman who could not cross the line drawn for her even when her own daughter was standing in plain sight. Then her eyes moved past me like I was made of glass. There are griefs so clean they barely leave a stain visible to others. That kind is among the hardest to explain. I started seeing a therapist the second year after I left. She was a small English woman with reading glasses she kept misplacing and 3 plants in the window of her beige office. The first time I tried to explain what had happened, I told the story badly. I told it the way Amish women tell painful things, indirectly, with too much mercy for everyone except myself. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What you are describing has a name." I remember how strange that felt. Not because I had never heard English words before, because I had never been taught that hidden things could be named without bringing the roof down. She taught me phrases I resisted at first. Coercive control, bodily autonomy, emotional withdrawal as punishment, community enforced compliance, consent that is not consent because the cost of saying no has been made unbearable. The first time she said that last one, I cried so hard I could not breathe through my nose. Not because the sentence was cruel, because it was exact. Another time she said, "The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love." And on a day when I was defending the church again, defending Jonas again, defending the entire architecture that had once held me up by pressing me down, she leaned forward and said, very gently, "A community that cannot hold your questions does not actually trust its own answers." That sentence undid something in me. I want to be careful here. My husband was not a monster. My mother was not a monster. The bishop's wife was not a monster. The bishop himself, for all the harm he carried through his gentleness, believed he was preserving order, not inflicting injury. That matters if we care about truth. But the system is the thing, not the people. The framework was the mistake, not only the hands that maintained it. I do not hate the Amish. There are gifts I still carry from that life. Work ethic, endurance, the memory of women who fed whole rooms and remembered who liked extra coffee without being told. Faith, too, though not in the same form. Community at its best can be beautiful. Shared labor can be beautiful. Plainness can be beautiful. Even now, when I smell bread rising in a warm kitchen or hear harness chains before dawn, there are parts of me that soften before they ache. But beauty does not cancel bondage. Warmth does not excuse what happens when warmth is used as a leash. And if you have ever lived in a place where kindness and control wore the same clothes, you know exactly what I mean. If you grew up in a place where your body was treated like a duty before it was treated like your own, I see you. If you were ever told that love meant yielding until there was nothing left in you that could make a clear refusal, I see you. If you have ever asked one small, honest question and watched the whole room go cold, I see you. If you ever lay awake beside someone and said yes because no had become too expensive, I see you. If you were raised to believe goodness in a woman was measured by how little of herself remained visible, I see you. If you learned to call exhaustion peace because no one around you had language kinder than obedience, I see you. If your family taught you that silence was virtue and then punished you for becoming difficult to hear, I see you. If you still defend the people who hurt you because they were hurt first by the same system, I see you. You were not weak. You were surviving inside a structure built to make your survival look like surrender. Tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you. Tell me your story, if you are ready. I read every single one. Subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. There is so much more I have not yet said. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life. Your voice belongs to you. It always did.